Shadow Hack. Chapter 61, Critical Breakthrough. Late at night, the Shadow was attentively watching the king's stronghold of the dwarf witches. In the attacks during the previous 2 nights, Li Yunmu had already investigated the manpower at this king's stronghold. They had a total of 10 green-eyed devil mastiffs, which were the main threat to the Shadow's survival. Not only could the green-eyed devil mastiffs accelerate very quickly, their eyesight was very sharp, allowing them to see extremely large distances within the darkness, that added together with their terrifying sense of smell. As long as the Shadow doesn't flee before coming into the vision of these mastiffs, it becomes extremely probable that they could catch up to it from behind and pin it down for long enough to allow a large number of dwarf witch elites to come over and attack it from all sides. Previously, most of the Shadow's deaths were because of them. Li Yunmu was extremely clear that if he didn't deal with these few devil mastiffs, then it would always remain impossible for the Shadow to attack this stronghold head-on and kill the monsters directly, thus decreasing its overall efficiency. So today, his main goal was to kill these green-eyed devil mastiffs. The situation was favorable. The king's stronghold had only trained 10 devil mastiffs. Otherwise, if there had been more, then with Li Yunmu's current strength, it would be extremely difficult to destroy this core stronghold of the dwarf witch race. Only 4 remain. Regarding the position of these green-eyed devil mastiffs, Li Yunmu had investigated it earlier. His consciousness descended into the Shadow, which was sitting outside the stronghold waiting for an opportunity. After being attacked by the Shadow for 2 continuous nights, at this moment, the security of King's stronghold was extremely strict. There was a guard at every 5 steps and a sentry at every 10. A large amount of blade dwarf witch patrols, as well as long-distance poison arrow dwarf witches, were waiting for the Shadow to attack. Li Yunmu concluded that if his Shadow revealed itself, it would be like throwing a spark into a warehouse filled with explosives. He could not act lightly. If it had been an ordinary fluxer, regardless of how formidable his strength was, to secretly infiltrate this king's stronghold would be 100 or 1,000 times more difficult. But presently, the Shadow was completely different from an ordinary fluxer. It was the master of the night, the darling of the darkness. Otherwise, if any normal fluxer could attack this king's stronghold by himself, then the other battle squads would probably have already raided this stronghold to the ground. However, reality wasn't a game. The successive attacks the previous 2 nights had led to this crazy security. Now, he couldn't use his previous strategies anymore, as the Li Yunmu hiding nearby had already discovered that water had been sprinkled on every building. Moreover, the kerosene pots which were used to illuminate the place couldn't be seen anymore. Within every region where he had ignited flames last night, overtly or covertly, a large number of elite dwarf witches were hidden as guards. If Li Yunmu secretly launched his attack, then he would still be able to cause a headache for this jittery stronghold, but if this was his only aim, then he wouldn't be able to protect the Shadow. Next instant, Li Yunmu controlled the Shadow to slowly get close to the stronghold and hide there. On the wall of the stronghold, there were lots of torches placed one after another, which were illuminating everything brightly. He wanted to try to enter using the darkness to hide, but there weren't any gaps in the light where the Shadow could hide. However, dimensional monsters were ultimately still dimensional beasts. With Li Yunmu waiting to find an opportunity to enter, he soon found a path inside the barracks, and this path was created by the densely packed dwarf witch patrols. Occasionally, they would patrol the surrounding territories, but when too long had passed, they would swap with the others, and when these guards returned back inside from the outside, that moment was his opportunity. After waiting for an hour, this opportunity finally arrived. Li Yunmu used this opportunity, and the Shadow instantly unleashed the 3rd layer insect step and quickly went into the blind spot of the patrol. That's right, he was using the shadow of a blade dwarf witch of the patrol to hide. If it had been the Shadow doing this instead of him, the Shadow certainly couldn't have thought of this tactic. But Li Yunmu was convinced that with the learning ability of the Shadow Spirit, as long as he demonstrated this once, the Shadow Spirit would certainly learn from him. Li Yunmu's mission was completely successful. Although the shadow of the blade dwarf witch was very short and small, for the shadow, which had an extremely flexible body, it wasn't a problem. He half squatted and noiselessly moved along with the shadow of the patrolling dwarf witch. Within a short while, Li Yunmu had already entered the stronghold without anyone knowing. At this instant, Li Yunmu handed the control back to the shadow. After regaining control of its body, the shadow didn't take action right away. Rather, it remained hidden on the roof, carefully observing the shadow of the patrolling guards. Only after a long time did it walk out the darkness, towards the familiar road heading to the beast chambers where the green-eyed devil mastiffs were locked. Even if you die once, you must get rid of these 4 beasts immediately. Li Yunmu tried to transfer his thoughts to the shadow, not knowing whether it could understand him clearly. At this instant, he could see that the shadow had entered the beast chamber and unleashed charged assault, launching an attack on one of the green-eyed devil mastiff. Li Yunmu's entire concentration was on the shadow. Suddenly, Li Yunmu felt an intense sensation which caused his heart to beat wildly and his temples began to thump endlessly. Not good, danger. Li Yunmu was completely astonished. Without any hesitation, he directly recalled his consciousness into his body and instinctively used arrow evasion and then insect step. Ding! You have suffered from an unprecedented mortal danger. Your intense survival instincts have allowed insect step to break through to the 5th layer. Insect step had undergone a qualitative leap. You have subconsciously used lizard climbing skill. At this moment of extreme danger, Li Yunmu faintly heard the system's notification. However, he had his hands full at the moment. The leg C point in both legs erupted with flux energy as he instantly moved to the corner of the bed from a reclining posture. Both his hands and legs grabbed the walls like a house lizard and he instantly began to shift at a high frequency. As his 5th layer insect step erupted, Li Yunmu unexpectedly manifested lizard-like qualities, with his 4 legs grabbing the wall. Bang! An enormous tremor passed through the earth and the bed he laid on was shattered into fragments as a dazzling golden light exploded. The fragments flew all around the room. What kind of strange battle skill is this? Surprisingly, you managed to dodge that. Li Yunmu's center of gravity was lowered and his whole body was stuck to the wall as his chest was rising up and down. At this instant, he discovered that at some unknown time, a mysterious person adorning silver crystal flux armor was inside the room. This mysterious person hadn't expected that his sneak attack would firmly be evaded by a rookie flux disciple youngster. Endless astonishment could be seen on his face that was covered by silver armor. Who are you? Li Yunmu's heart sank. He certainly hadn't expected that someone would be able to pass through the alarms and defenses of the Fort Type 3 without making any noise. While he was infiltrating the king's stronghold, an assassin had surprisingly infiltrated his own room. This was simply irony, plain naked irony. However, when he thought of the person who wanted his life, Li Yunmu couldn't simply die for him. A trace of killing intent began to emit from his body. Regardless of the strength of the enemy, since he wanted Li Yunmu's life, he must be ready to pay the price. The enemy had an extremely strong presence. Sensing which, Li Yunmu understood that he would have to use some sneak attacks to win. The unfortunate thing was that this attack was too sudden. Li Yunmu couldn't grab his war blade. Instantly, Li Yunmu felt an unprecedented crisis coming. Who I am does not matter, what matters is that you will certainly die today, so die. The body of the mysterious enemy wearing silver-colored crystal armor suddenly jolted and immediately, his strength increased. His whole body was covered by silver armor and glittering golden light. Silver armor and golden light? Half-step gold crystal flux disciple? Second only to the peak rainbow-colored flux energy in the 5th dimension. Give me your life 8-pole flame dragon claw. The enemy's voice seemed to come from far away. Li Yunmu only saw a golden halo which quickly reached its pinnacle, to the point that his eyes couldn't even manage to react. A bright golden claw, which appeared like a dragon's but wasn't truly that of a dragon's, was covered with extremely terrifying flames as it rushed to catch him. Chapter 62, The Price for Trying to Kill Me. Only when he truly confronted the killing move of a half-step golden crystal flux disciple, did Li Yunmu fully realize this layer's formidable strength. All along, he had heard of people saying that as a flux disciple's cultivation rises to the next layer, the disparity between each layer increases. Until now, he had defeated the current top 10 most formidable people of Heavenly Cloud City but had never experienced this disparity. That was because the other party wasn't allowed to use their congealed crystal armor, so they could only display half of their full strength. Frankly speaking, regardless of whatever strange battlefield was chosen within the dimensional battlefield or matched with any kind of battle mode, it wasn't a place where a fluxer could increase his cultivation. Rather, it allowed the fluxers to temper their battle skills and places utmost importance on their battle level. Thus, even Li Yunmu, with his low cultivation, could display the strength of his stacked foundation skills to the pinnacle in the dimensional battlefield. But what about in reality? This was Li Yunmu's first time facing an enemy with a higher cultivation. According to rumors, after reaching the third layer and becoming a silver flux disciple, one's strength would have undergone a qualitative change. Let alone mention the fact that today, he was facing a half-step golden crystal flux disciple. The terrifying and extremely powerful golden flux energy had suppressed everything. Li Yunmu could only watch helplessly as the golden claw came towards him to catch him. He instantly felt as if the surrounding space had been sealed off by some formless pressure and he felt like an ant trapped within amber, making any kind of movement extremely strenuous. It couldn't be evaded. The most annoying thing was that previously, he had been preparing to sleep, so he had already put his battle soldier equipment and war blade by the side of the bed. After losing the war blade and the defense of battle soldier equipment, he could not use the famous violent blade skill or his triple-layered defense combined into one, causing his strength to be greatly reduced. Too careless. Li Yunmu sensed that he was facing an unprecedented crisis. He didn't know whether he could resist the thunderous attack in front of him just by relying on Admiralty cover and copper body. He didn't have complete certainty for the first time. Death was imminent for Li Yunmu. Catch this blade! At this time, he heard a voice as if heaven was calling for him from outside the door. Just as the voice echoed, a barely audible sound of something cutting through the wind reached his ears. As it turned out, at some point in time, Ling Shuang had already appeared outside the door as she rushed and fiercely threw a war blade towards Li Yunmu before the enemy's killing attack reached him. Li Yunmu didn't hesitate and subconsciously made a grab, easily catching the war blade. The instant he caught the war blade, his presence instantly transformed. As long as I have a blade in my hand, the world is mine. Li Yunmu only sensed Ling Shuang throwing the war blade which fell into his hands. This war blade seemed to have intelligence. Surprisingly, it crazily swallowed the flux energy erupting from the 4 flux points on his hands. Before, he had already been growing restless. Sensing that he was surrounded by perils, he immediately unleashed Danger Critical Strike. Instantly, a smoothly flowing air erupted. Ah, die for me! Li Yunmu bellowed as cold killing intent shot through the roof. Danger Critical Strike. This was Li Yunmu's desperate killing skill to break out from this dire life and death situation. It had been comprehended by the shadow 2 days ago and now, he himself had to fully unleash this skill for the first time. Within a moment, he used the 15 forms of third layer violent blade, 15 continuous strikes. Facing death's door, Li Yunmu instantly used the 15 strikes. These 15 strikes of violent blade seemed to break through the shackles of time, even surpassing the extreme limit 100 killing strikes used by Feng Shiyang. Within a second, being instantly struck by 15 continuous strikes, the formless pressure sealing off the surrounding space was broken down and the shackles obstructing his movement disappeared completely. Critical strike. Cut for me. If you don't die, then I will die. The superimposition of the strength of 15 strikes together condensed to form the final strike, the 16th strike. Unexpectedly, at this time when he was being forced to choose between life and death, Li Yunmu exploded with his full strength. This was the final strike which would take down the enemy together with him. If the enemy didn't die, then he would. This final strike had the sum of the strength of the first 15 strikes of Violent Blade, and this strike surpassed the standard strength at his cultivation layer. Bang! The Violent Blade erupted with a blade energy condensed in the form of the tip of a spear and heavily struck on the golden claw, pushing him down. Even if it was the dazzling golden flux energy, at this instant, facing the critical strike filled with blade energy, it was completely shattered, leaving behind an unprotected large palm in the path of the fierce strike. "Ah, my hand!" Underneath the golden light silver armor, the angry voice of the enemy echoed. The golden light had shattered, a half-step golden crystal flux disciple's killing move had surprisingly been stopped. The fierce blade energy didn't stop after destroying the enemy's golden flux energy, it continued to heavily strike the enemy's silver armor. The silver crystal armor, which represented formidable defense, was broken down instantly when facing the strike of this fiercely cold blade energy, and the remaining energy heavily knocked against the enemy's body. The walls of the fort Type 3 had already been broken into countless pieces after being hit by the shockwaves from the killing moves of these two people striking at each other. When the dust settled, traces of the half-step golden crystal flux disciple, who had invaded the room, couldn't be found anywhere. Only a palm was lying on the ground, which had been cut off by the danger critical strike. At this moment, Li Yunmu had already lost all the strength in his body as he slowly fell down to the ground from the wall. Using this killing skill, danger critical strike, was no joking matter. Instantly unleashing the full Violent Blade skill, and the last strike with the strength equal to that of the sum of the continuous 15 strikes had used up all his strength. After the final strike, not only did it make the opponent resist a terrifying strike, it had also used up the last bit of energy in Li Yunmu's body. Now, he couldn't even move regardless of how many times he tried. With his fuzzy vision, he could only see a black shadow. As soon as the final strike collided, the black shadow did its utmost to rush over here. This black shadow wasn't that of Ling Shuang, rather, it was his own shadow. When Li Yunmu encountered the unprecedented danger, the shadow, which was just about to attack Green-Eyed Devil Mastiff, transformed into nothingness and returned back to Li Yunmu's side. However, the instant the final deadly strikes of both of them collided, it was just too quick, the result was instantly clear. But the time shadow returned back to Li Yunmu, it arrived just in time to witness this act, and at this instant, it was very clear that the shadow chased after the enemy and made him flee. It was a fact that the shadow's existence wasn't purely used as a hack to level up, rather, it could also kill people. When the host's life was in danger, the person attacking Li Yunmu would certainly suffer an extremely frantic counterattack from the shadow. The shadow won't die after being killed. Li Yunmu, who had lost all strength, couldn't do anything right now except pant madly and ask Ling Shuang. "Why did the enemy want to kill me?" "Simple. The two of us are in the path of the others and are offending the interests of other people. The other party wouldn't dare to attack me, so they chose to deal with you." At this moment, Ling Shuang had already recovered from the shock of Li Yunmu's final critical strike, which turned the tables, and replied slowly. With Ling Shuang's explanation, Li Yunmu instantly realized that within the 5 days of training, because of his and Ling Shuang's one close combat and one range attacker combination, Lucky Wind City's ranking had already become infinitely close to entering the top 50. At this time, some background power had decided to launch an attack to protect their interests. Since Ling Shuang was under the tutelage of a formidable person, the background power didn't dare to provoke that person's anger by laying hand on Ling Shuang, which left them with only one target, Li Yunmu, who had a complete rookie with no background. So that was the case. So they had chosen the soft target. Li Yunmu finally understood everything, a trace of coldness passed through his face. He hadn't expected that the training competition for first-time rookies would be concealing such darkness. However, the enemy had sent the wrong person, he certainly wasn't a soft target, and after this calamity had passed, they won't get another chance to make a move against him. System, by all possible means, I must search for the background power which tried to kill me. I must make these people realize that there is a price to be paid for trying to kill me. Lee Yunmu. Lee Yunmu had never been someone who would be easily bullied. When he was an ordinary person, he had been like this, and this habit had intensified after he became a fluxer. Since the other party wanted his life and he hadn't died, then they must wait for endless retaliations from him. Chapter 63, Accumulating 10,000 Experience Points. The enemy's DNA has already been collected, it has been scanned, and a list of enemies' detailed physical data has been compiled, and the information has been placed on the list of hostile targets. Next time when the host encounters this enemy, the system would automatically recognize that person. The system ejected another notification informing him that enemies' detailed features had been collected. Lee Yunmu relaxed. The enemy wouldn't be able to run if he thinks that no one would recognize him under the silver crystal armor. The assassin probably wouldn't have expected that from the moment he launched his attack, he had been thoroughly scanned by the system. The most important thing was still to increase his own strength. As for revenge, Lee Yunmu snorted, there was enough time for that in the future. Many thanks for the help this time, Lee Yunmu said while returning the war blade back to Ling Shuang. Only then did he discover that this war blade was very different from the series of weapons created by the Alliance and sold in the market. He couldn't help but take another look at it. This is flux spirit equipment. All the flux spirit equipment have their own blade spirits. Fluxers use it to have better coordination, and it could make them much more formidable. Ling Shuang took back the war blade but didn't provide much of an explanation. Thanks again, I owe you my life. Lee Yunmu repeated, expressed his thanks. If at that time, Ling Shuang hadn't rushed over and thrown the war blade towards him before the attack of enemy reached him, maybe he wouldn't simply be kneeling here with only the defense of the Admiralty cover and copper body. This had indeed indirectly saved his life. Don't mention it, it was your own hard work in the end. Next, both of them searched for the idiot trio lying unconscious in the remains of the collapsed fort. After careful inquiry, they became aware that initially, the mysterious man had attracted Crooked Teeth Jiang outside the blue net and had directly taken the control of fort's alarm and defensive system. Because of this, the enemy had been able to silently infiltrate the fort. Lee Yunmu kept on silently gazing at the deeply ashamed Crooked Teeth Jiang and then looked at Big Xiang and Brother Thin, who had blank faces. At this moment, he was at the complete loss of words. All of these squad members were pigs, Ling Shuang was the only reliable one. The enemy clearly didn't want to kill the idiot trio of Big Xiang, after all, it wasn't necessary. It would have just pointlessly exaggerated the matter. Otherwise, if he really wanted to kill them, then these three would have been dead long ago. I have received serious injuries, so for the next 2 days, the battle achievement of this battle squad will rely on you all. Lee Yunmu thought of something and seized the opportunity under the pretense of recuperating from injuries. Big Xiang had really come well prepared. He quickly took out another fortress from his storage badge and absorbed in the previous one. This time, Crooked Teeth Jiang didn't keep the controls of the defensive system of the fortress on himself. Gradually, the Big Bear battle squad calmed down as the night passed on. Meanwhile, Big Xiang also sent information of the attack to the Fluxer Guild as soon as possible. While Lee Yunmu and others were gradually calming down and began resting, the Lucky Wind battle squad on the far side of Lamo River Zone was also going through a similar chaos. The sneak attack that happened to them was nearly the same as the Big Bear battle squad. At this moment, Luojin had been critically injured and had lost consciousness during the attack. His current condition was unknown. In fact, not only the people of Lucky Wind City, the troops of other cities with different rankings had also received successive attacks from mysterious people. Within one night, great ups and downs happened in the rankings of each city. When Lee Yunmu returned back his own room, several minutes had passed after the attack. He had finally restored some of his strength. Since he had already decided that he wouldn't go out tomorrow and would rest, then what followed was obviously the hack system. The king's stronghold of the dwarf witches was indeed the main headquarters of dwarf witch race. If he could destroy this stronghold, then he would certainly obtain some major treasure as a result. Other battle squads would not dare to attack the tribe of human-like monsters assembled in societies, but Li Yunmu was different. With his defensive strength and unkillable shadow, he would be able to exterminate the king's stronghold as long as he has sufficient patience and energy. That night, Li Yunmu recalled back the shadow and continued attacking the stronghold. Presently, he needed to increase his strength as quickly as possible. Even for revenge, without sufficient strength, he couldn't do anything. As the shadow sensed its host's summoning, it condensed behind Li Yunmu within a short while. The shadow's thinking was also the same as Li Yunmu. When fighting against an enemy who had silver crystal armor and had cultivated gold flux energy attained at the 4th layer, the shadow wasn't able to do anything except worsening his injuries while he was fleeing. In fact, Li Yunmu also hadn't expected that the shadow could really kill him. Only if the shadow unleashed the danger critical strike could it have done anything to him, but this critical killing skill couldn't be used so casually. Sensing the anger in the host's heart, the shadow returned back to the king's stronghold to continue with its hack. The shadow was already full of killing intent right now, and it had learned the tactic Li Yunmu had displayed previously and entered the stronghold by hiding in the shadow of the patrol, taking the initiative to attack the green-eyed devil mastiffs. The battle began in the beast chamber. Finally, at the cost of one life, the shadow had dealt with the main threat posed to it by the stronghold. Without the threat of these 4 tards, the shadow resurrected after 10 minutes and launched his attack on the stronghold at midnight. Ding! Your shadow has attacked patrols formed of many dwarf witches. Your shadow has launched violent blade critical leap strike and had beheaded 15 dwarf witches in succession, cutting down the captain of the patrol in the final jump strike, collecting 1 ordinary flux energy crystal. Ding! Your shadow had unleashed charged assault without turning back and dashed within the group of dwarf witches. It went on a killing spree within the group of poison arrow dwarf witches using wind god tornado kick repeatedly. Ding! Your shadow has been seriously injured after being bombarded by fireballs by several dwarf wizards. Ding! Your shadow has been besieged from all sides and had unleashed critical danger strike, killing 7 dwarf wizards. Your shadow pounced on the guards formed of blade dwarf witches who killed your shadow. Your shadow is now dead. After another 10 minutes, the resurrected shadow launched a violent attack on the stronghold again. Without the green-eyed devil mastiffs, the shadow, which had 10 flux points open in its body, crazily killed many dwarf wizards. The injuries it suffered became lesser and lesser with time. During the second resurrection, the time it could survive for grew longer and longer. Li Yunmu kept earning a large number of experience points and ability points at all times. Staking its life the second time, the shadow killed an unknown but extremely large number of dwarf witches during the second half of the night. These included 1st layer dwarf wizards who had reached grade 10 and 2nd layer great dwarf wizards. Using the charged assault repeatedly, it had forcefully killed countless enemies. The harvests this time was huge, far greater compared to last night. It had to be said, using violent blade and wind god tornado kick after opening the flux points in his hands and legs, his strength had become extremely sharp. Every time he erupted with blade energy and flux energy, killing the weak dwarf witches who were only at grade 7, became increasingly easier and smoother for Li Yunmu with his current strength. Finally, when the color of the sky had turned red, suddenly, a special system notification appeared within Li Yunmu's mind. Congratulations, you have reached a total of 10,000 experience points today. Presently, the host has the qualifications to create a second shadow. Would you like to use your 10,000 experience points to create the second shadow? Yes or no? Chapter 64, 2 Unrivaled Shadows. Second Shadows. Li Yunmu was completely stunned. He had never expected that the shadow hack system could surprisingly create another shadow. Yes. System indifferently replied. In other words, I can produce another shadow which can be used for the shadow hack? As long as I have enough experience points. Li Yunmu still couldn't believe it, feeling as if he was in some kind of dream. Yes, host, you have understood correctly. as long as the host accumulates sufficient experience points, theoretically, you can produce a third shadow, fourth shadow. Even infinite shadows. Holy S***it. Now, Li Yunmyo completely understood. He pinched himself in the arm, feeling the pain. He understood this wasn't a dream. When he first heard the name of the super shadow hack system, he had thought about how was it super. Only now did he understand how great this system was. Until now, Li Yunmyo had never clearly understood the main use of experience points, but now, he understood that the experience points weren't to increase his cultivation, rather, they were used to condense another shadow or to save the shadow spirit or for any other service for the shadow. Meanwhile, ability points were important to increase his cultivation. As for space elements, they were analogous to the hard currency used to purchase things. Great! Only now did Li Yunmyo finally realize that this was an extremely perfect system. Previously, either its functions weren't fully explored or it had not been upgraded completely. Second reminder, host, do you confirm the use of 10,000 experience points to condense the second shadow? Yes. This time, Li Yunmyo didn't hesitate, only an idiot would decline. Next instant, following Li Yunmyo's confirmation, the experience points which he had painstakingly earned were deducted in one shot. Meanwhile, the loading screen for the shadow appeared within his consciousness. See 1%, 16%, 39%, 78%, 100%. Next instant. Congratulations, you have successfully condensed the second shadow, urging the host to continue to work harder, best of luck. At this moment, Li Yunmyo didn't pay any attention to the system's notification. He kept on staring behind his body. A faint shadow appeared. From a vague image, it slowly grew clearer. After becoming clear enough, it transformed again to finally stand silently behind his body. So simple, now he had one more shadow? Even if he doesn't use it for the hack and constantly keep it by his side, wouldn't it be like having a shadow guard? Next moment, Li Yunmyo only felt extremely happy. If he had two shadows earlier this night, then would that half-step golden crystal flux disciple be able to escape with his life so easily? If the two shadows, together with him, a total 3 people attacked him with 15 strikes of violent blade, then how would he still be able to leave here alive? At this instant Li Yunmyo couldn't predict the outcome with certainty, but he was absolutely clear that even if the enemy could escape, the hunter could become the prey at any time. As Li Yunmyo continued to think about it, he found it more and more joyous. Ding! Would you like to dispatch your second shadow to join in the attack on the King Grade stronghold? The system released another notification. Yes. Li Yunmyo woke up to reality. Presently, he possessed the ability to use 2 shadow hacks simultaneously. He didn't hesitate any longer and dispatched the newly condensed second shadow towards the King Grade stronghold. With Shadow 1 and Shadow 2 cooperating with each other, the speed of the destruction of the King Grade stronghold increased greatly. Soon, Shadow 2 entered the battle. At this time, the whole King Grade stronghold was in chaos. After careful observation, it became clear to Li Yunmyo that this Shadow 2 really was far less intelligent compared to Shadow 1 and could only use the foundation skills proficiently one by one to kill monsters. However, Shadow 2's strength was similarly synchronized with Li Yunmyo's own cultivation. The triple defense of Admiralty cover, copper body, and battle soldier equipment was combined into one. Shadow 2 simply relied upon its formidable defense and went on a killing spree among the large group of dwarf witches using violent blade. Moreover, Shadow 1, that was the young shadow, after becoming aware of its partner joining the hack battle, it immediately erupted with insect step, then arrow evasion, then insect step again, followed by insect step, charged assault, and then violent blade critical leap strike. Using the 15 consecutive strikes, it killed its way through. It seized the chance and used the final jumping strike as flux energy surged through its legs. It jumped high and escaped the encirclement. Li Yunmu only observed the young shadow jumping around a few times and could clearly see the progress it made in using the foundation skills stacked with each other. After easily escaping from the encirclement, it directly rushed towards the squad of dwarf wizards, attacking from behind. It has to be said that the young shadow's learning ability was too formidable. Clearly, it had the method of using foundation skills successively one after other from Li Yunmu's battles during the daytime. Furthermore, it had become even more proficient than Li Yunmu after using them repeatedly. When the young shadow infiltrated the group of dwarf wizards, it successively used Wind God Tornado Kick and Violent Blade Critical Leap Strike, and instantly, a large number of dwarf wizards that were staying safely at the back and releasing fireballs were decimated. With the young shadow especially targeting dwarf wizard squads, the threats to S.H.A.D.O.W immediately decreased. Ding! Your S.H.A.D.O.W has been hit by several poisonous arrows and received XX amount of damage. Ding! Your S.H.A.D.O.W had received a stab from the short blade of Blade Dwarf Witch, 0 damage received. When Admiralty cover was upgraded to the 12th layer, it attained 42% reduction in incoming damage. These weak dwarf witches that had an average of grade 7 strength were simply cannon fodder, they couldn't injure the S.H.A.D.O.W now. Even if they all attacked crazily as a group, then the S.H.A.D.O.W would only receive an extremely small amount of damage with its defense remaining unpenetrated. Next moment, both shadows raised the entire King grade stronghold to ground. One of them was inside the encirclement using Wind God Tornado Kick to repeatedly kick the Blade Dwarf Witches into the sky where they would explode and die, while another was using Violent Blade Critical Leap Strike and went on a killing spree within a group of dwarf wizards. Their astonishing efficiency was outside Li Yunmu's expectations. At this moment, within his brain, an endless number notification regarding the collected experience and ability points continued to echo one after another. Apart from this, the number of flux energy crystals continued to increase within the shared storage batch. 5 crystals, 10 crystals, 15 crystals. 25 crystals, 30 crystals. When both shadows were battling in coordination with each other, this night became the most destructive night of the whole King grade stronghold in its lifetime. Li Yunmu couldn't keep himself from continuously checking the storage badge and discovered that within a short moment, the total number of flux crystals, adding the small amount he had before, had now reached an astonishing amount, 35 crystals. Holy effing S.H.A.D.W, within one night, he had obtained 35 crystals. One might as well ask what else did he need? Let alone mention the opening of 2 remaining flux points, these would also be enough to form some portion of flux crystals required to condense the ordinary crystal flux armor. Next, Li Yunmu took out 1 flux crystal and began to cultivate while sitting cross-legged. To reach first layer ordinary crystal flux disciple required opening 12 flux points. Now, he only needed to open the 2 remaining breast window points. As long as these 2 flux points were completely opened, then the 12 flux points within his body would instantly get connected. The flux energy from these 12 flux points would continue to grow and multiply without end. The collected flux energy and extreme defense together would produce a great increase in power, allowing him to reach half-step ordinary crystal flux disciple. Chapter 65, Let's Fight. 1 crystal, 2 crystals, 10 crystals, 14 crystals. Li Yunmu consecutively absorbed 14 active ordinary flux energy crystals. Rumble. He felt as if a mini cosmos had formed in his body: celestial point, origin pass point, breast window point, celestial spring point, pom-pond point, jumping circle point and leg C points. Flux energy instantly surged through the 12 flux points and connected together, forming a stream of endless flux energy flowing through them. Immediately, the flux energy in Li Yunmu's whole body erupted with flux energy. Half-step ordinary crystal flux disciple success. At this instant, Li Yunmu only felt as if his body was filled with endless flux energy. With every breath, every body action, every movement felt as if it was filled with a large amount of energy flowing out. Naturally, this was only the false sensation of breakthrough, but it could not be denied that when all the 12 flux points had been opened, Li Yunmu felt extremely strong. He lightly stamped his leg, but the flux energy that erupted out from it wasn't just from the jumping circle point and leg C point, rather, the flux energy transferred from all 12 points inside his body. He hadn't felt such a sensation of overflowing power before. Previously, he had only felt as if flux energy could be drawn out calmly over a long term. But now, not only could it erupt with even more flux energy that was transferred from all flux points, it had also become easier to control the flux energy, and most important thing, the amount of flux energy in his body could last for quite long. From only 2 flux points supplying flux energy, now, all 12 flux points could supply flux energy together. This difference was like the difference between a war chariot with 2 engines and the Thunder God war chariot with 12 engines. When Li Yunmu forced the flux energy in his entire body, gradually, a thin and faint layer of flux energy protective cover appeared on his figure. This cover protected his entire body from head to toe. This was the benefit of opening and linking the 3 flux points in chest and abdomen with other 9 in the head, legs, and arms. His defense had swelled greatly. Compared to battle soldier equipment or silver base equipment, this thin layer of flux energy protective cover seemed insufficient from the angle of physical defense, but these material armor didn't have a special property which it had, and that was that it could provide him with a cushioning defense which could adjust to changes quickly. It could resist the shockwaves from explosions or could stop energy from infiltrating his body. Other armors couldn't compare to its cushioning defensive ability. Moreover, Fluxers usually called this layer of flux energy protective cover as flux crystal energy armor. Actually, it was a genuine source of crystal armor. All the people usually say, if a fluxer could not condense this armor, then he wasn't a true fluxer. A fluxer without the flux armor would find it very difficult to contend against modern troops, but if a fluxer could condense his energy armor, then ordinary people were just like ants in his eyes. Li Yunmu slightly raised his head to look at the sky. From this instant, he had started to walk on the path of congealing the armor step by step. He roughly estimated the number of flux energy crystals he would need to congeal his crystal armor. This estimate was too shocking. With his 7-point cultivation talent, if he wanted to condense the armor for the first time, he would require a total of 252 stable flux energy crystals. Yes, he hadn't made a mistake. It would indeed require 252 stable flux energy crystals. Yes, stable flux energy crystals and not active flux energy crystals, exactly triple the number of flux crystals he used to open all his flux points. The market cost of one stable flux energy crystal was roughly 10,000 dimensional coins, so 252 crystals would cost 2.52 million dimensional coins. This was a terrifyingly huge sum of money. Probably only people like Li Daxiang, the son of someone wealthy, could get their hands on such large amount of coins. Naturally, Li Yunmu didn't have any means to obtain such large amount of money to buy stable flux energy crystals, but that doesn't matter, he still had the hack system. Innate talent doesn't matter, money doesn't matter, background also doesn't matter as long as he had the hack machine. This was why people valued innate cultivation talent so much. Because the number of flux crystals and time required by a pinnacle talent to open his flux points and congeal his crystal armor was far lesser compared to the number required by lower level talents. Li Yunmu glanced at the remaining 22 flux energy crystals and sighed in disappointment. But it was still okay, he had recently created the second shadow. Otherwise, only heaven knows how long it would take to collect 252 flux energy crystals. After successfully opening and linking the 12 flux points, he had now become a half-step ordinary crystal flux disciple. Li Yunmu walked out of his room in the fortress and raised his head to look at the sky. At this time, the sun was already high in the sky. Big Xiong and others had already begun today's hunting trip. Ling Shuang was roasting a piece of some dimensional beast's thigh on a vacant space in front of the fortress. You haven't gone with the others to hunt? Li Yunmu was slightly shocked. They were worried about you, so they asked me to stay here. Ling Shuang replied coldly. You got out of bed just in time, the roasted meat is almost ready, come eat. Li Yunmu massaged his glabella, a warm feeling rose in his heart. Although Big Xiong and others were comparatively dishonest, regarding the treatment of fellow companions, they were far better than others. This was the main reason why Li Yunmu was willing to stay with this group. In this battle squad, people don't scheme against each other, neither was there any pressure on him nor anyone who thought himself as to be a proud son of heaven and pushed others around. He was quite fond of such a relaxed atmosphere. Cultivation was important, but having a carefree mental state was also important. With the existence of the shadow hack, he basically didn't need to go mad over increasing his strength. If you also hadn't gone to battle, the achievements of the battle squad will shrink significantly. Li Yunmu wasn't polite and quickly walked over to cut a piece of roasted meat overflowing with oil and took out a bottle of wine from his storage space. One sip of wine after each mouthful of meat felt quite refreshing. He clearly understood that Ling Shuang, who was at the battle yesterday, had clearly realized he was just pretending to be injured, thus he also didn't try to hide it. Their foundation is too weak, quickly increasing their cultivation isn't beneficial for battles. Since you have used this excuse to rest, I thought it would be good for them to get a shock. Ling Shuang saw Li Yunmu take the roasted meat and she also stopped her hand and picked the roasted cutlet and began to eat with small bites. So why aren't you hunting for black crystals? Don't tell me you intend to waste 1 month for them. Li Yunmu asked with confusion. Aren't you too curious about me? Ling Shuang looked at him strangely. No, I am just curious why you aren't rushing to increase your cultivation. Li Yunmu said bluntly. Someday in the future, you will understand by yourself. Ling Shuang took the last bite and stood up. Li Yunmu, I know you have some secret on you, I might be a little interested in your secret, but I would much prefer if you let me experience your blade skill. Since no one is here to bother us, why don't we fight? Ling Shuang's presence suddenly transformed, she seemed to have transformed into a cold sword. Her 2 calm eyes seemed to shoot 2 rays of sword energy, stabbing into Li Yunmu. Good God, this crazy woman! When Li Yunmu sensed the battle intent coming from the other party, he couldn't help but curse in his heart. He really hadn't expected this elegant and beautiful woman would start fighting immediately. Chapter 66, Still Not Enough. Sure. Li Yunmu replied while standing up. In fact, he also wanted to test out Ling Shuang's true strength. According to rumors, she could even fight against a silver crystal flux disciple with the strength of a black crystal flux disciple. He had been wanting to know her true strength for a long time. Her words were also correct, being the latest disciple of that lord, she had resources and didn't need to know his secret because whatever Li Yunmu had, she also had. The battle intent emitted from her body clearly showed that she was someone sincere to the martial path. At this instant, Li Yunmu completely understood Ling Shuang, this was a person who was completely immersed in cultivation. Since this was the case, then a battle was inevitable. Li Yunmu could already sense the battle intent flowing out of Ling Shuang. Receiving her direct provocation, he slowly took out his blade as a trace of thin blade intent started to emit out from his body. Although it wasn't like Ling Shuang's gaudy sword intent that felt as if it was directly piercing through the heavens, Li Yunmu's blade energy had a trace of tyranny in it with the intention of pressing forward boldly. Without him realizing, Li Yunmu's body had been fostering a blade intent which could be classified as a blade intent born exclusively for him. Good, you can cultivate your own blade intent without a master. Just relying on this fact, you've already surpassed many people. Sensing the thin blade intent coming out of Li Yunmu's body, although it seemed faint, the trace of tyrannical killing intent made Ling Shuang exclaim with surprise. Originally, she had also cultivated what was classified as her own sword intent after going through countless tribulations. Sword intent and blade intent weren't something which ordinary fluxers could cultivate. However, who said that Li Yunmu didn't have a master? Li Yunmu's master was the most formidable system. When he had been reaping countless lives by himself every day, when he had been using blade skills repeatedly every day, when he had been becoming more and more proficient in blade skills, then even if he himself wasn't clear, but as long as he had the blade in his hand, his whole personality would undergo a great transformation. Here I come. This wasn't the dimensional battlefield, he wasn't battling any enemy here. Li Yunmu pointed his blade towards the other party and launched a one-step charged assault to get close to Ling Shuang. Yes, it was a one-step charged assault and not the usual charged assault which displayed its power to the pinnacle. When Li Yunmu unleashed charged assault this time, it wasn't extremely quick like before, but instead had a trace of nimbleness. Li Yunmu's one-step charged assault wasn't very quick, but with every step forward, his figure continued to greatly transform in the eyes of Ling Shuang. He seemed slow, but in reality, he was quickly moving towards Ling Shuang. He slashed his blade which directly chopped towards Ling Shuang without any feint. This strike wasn't violent blade, but rather, the first strike with more power at the end of charged assault. This seemingly light strike was actually very heavy, the blade intent was emitting a large amount of flux energy. The trace of concealed tyrannical killing intent immediately reminded Ling Shuang that if she wasn't careful, she would encounter a thunderously violent attack the next instant. Clang! Ling Shuang moved her sword to block, the blade and sword collided. Although they were only trying to probe each other with this strike, Ling Shuang was still forced to retreat half a step. Clearly, the main strike of charged assault had been more powerful than she expected. Li Yunmu gained the upper hand, but he couldn't grab the opportunity of the opponent retreating half a step to launch violent blade. It wasn't that he didn't want to, rather, he felt that he couldn't. He had a profound sensation that the enemy wouldn't give him the opportunity to unleash the skill. For the first time, after meeting an opponent like Ling Shuang, he truly discovered that the so-called top 10 most powerful he encountered at the dimensional battlefield wasn't really that powerful. This enemy had grasped a profound battle strategy, although Li Yunmu couldn't clearly tell what it was, his speed wasn't slowing down in the slightest. Insect step, insect step, insect step. He continuously used insect step but didn't erupt out with extreme speed, rather, he was moving quickly, lightly, just changing his position and revolving around Ling Shuang while exchanging blows with her. Every strike was at a different angle, every strike was faster than previous one and even more direct. However, Ling Shuang's great sword was stopping them equally as fast, receiving them one after other. Both of them had moved extremely quickly within a split second, not realizing that they had exchanged more than 10 blows. There wasn't any gap, any opportunity. Li Yunmu's heart sunk. He could tell that his opponent this time, Ling Shuang, wasn't the same as the rest, but he never expected that the enemy being in a defensive position would make the battle so much difficult. Even after using violent blade all the time, it was surprisingly difficult to find an opportunity. Every time he struck towards Ling Shuang, he had a feeling that he couldn't unleash violent blade. What was this sensation? This was that Lord's personal disciple? Li Yunmu's body suddenly stopped, ending the fight. He gloomily said, "Let's stop, I can't use violent blade in front of you." Defeat? Sure enough, at this instant, Li Yunmu became depressed, a sense of loss rose within his heart. It wasn't that he didn't want to use violent blade like he had done previously to overwhelm the enemy, rather, he couldn't. The sadness on his face was clear. His battle instincts were informing him that as soon as he used the violent blade's first form, it would certainly be broken by the other party. Both of them had exchanged more than 10 blows, all of them were normal attacks, but Li Yunmu was clear within his heart, this battle was his complete loss. Li Yunmu was quite depressed, this was the first time he had encountered such situation. For the first time, he had felt that he couldn't use all of his power in the battle. Seeing the gloomy expression on Li Yunmu's face, a smile appeared and quickly disappeared on Ling Shuang's face. She didn't say anything, only keeping the sword back into its sheath and standing there. "If you had entered the entranced state like that day, I would have lost," Ling Shuang said lightly. Entranced state? Li Yunmu shook his head but didn't answer in detail. In fact, regarding the battle sage entranced state from a few days ago, he himself wasn't very clear about how he entered it. In his opinion, it should have been because the shadow's usual killing instinct had influenced him, since they were now in sync. Now, even if he wanted to enter it, he couldn't regardless of how much he tried. After the battle, Li Yunmu went back to his room and sat there for a long time, then he suddenly said in the empty room, "System, the battle skills I practiced seem to have been abolished in front of her." At this moment, Li Yunmu even began to doubt the battle skills he learned from the system. Could these battle skills, which improve with proficiency points, actually prevail over those formidable people who genuinely walk the martial path? After all, everything he had wasn't cultivated by himself. Host must not become confused because of her. There are many ways to prevail over her, like absolute strength, absolute speed, absolute defense. As long as you have sufficient strength to dominate everything, any martial path or skill is just empty talk in front of absolute strength. They are just like fleeting clouds in front of absolute strength. The system calmly replied. Then how come she didn't allow me to even launch an attack in the battle? Li Yunmu muttered to himself. That is because while your strength might be higher than hers, it's just that her cultivation layer is higher than yours. If host possesses a unique ability, then this so-called difference between layers can be broken in one hit. So if we have similar strength and I don't have any unique ability, then in the future, how can I handle such an enemy? Don't tell me I will also have to enter the tutelage of someone formidable. Li Yunmu still couldn't understand. No need to think too much. When you reach the 5th layer, reaching perfection state of violent blade, then the enemy's layer or skill won't be worth mentioning. The system gave a vague reply. 5th layer of violent blade. Wait a minute, I understand. Instantly, Li Yunmu felt as if the clouds had disappeared from his vision and he could understand everything clearly. Yes, the system's words were correct. Why was he being so confused? Just because he was defeated by the disciple of someone formidable. This time's failure wasn't because of the system, rather, because his violent blade had not been upgraded sufficiently. Whatever kind of skills the other party uses, how could he forget his own? Just as the system said, as long as his battle skill reached the pinnacle, would Ling Shuang's defense still remain so tight? Perhaps, her cultivation was unique. *T, this bro here would break stars in one punch. So what if your path was extremely unique? It would also not matter after this bro's one punch. When Li Yunmu entered his consciousness sea again, he discovered that Shadow 1 and Shadow 2 had collected more than 10 flux energy crystals during this period. Ling Shuang? Haha, you sinister woman! Because of her words, he had become depressed, but then why did she attack? What did she mean by those words? Chapter 67, Terrifying Calamity Descends. Days continued to pass, and for the next 5 days, under the pretense of being injured, Li Yunmu didn't participate in any battles and remained in the fortress. As for Ling Shuang, after resting for 2 more days, she went out to battle with the rest of the Big Bear battle squad. However, after losing Li Yunmu, who was both the main frontline and main damage dealer at the same time, the achievements of the Big Bear battle squad continued to fall. Especially with Ling Shuang remaining at the back and not using her full strength, this caused the achievements of the Big Bear battle squad to take a nosedive. This situation was not only happening to the Big Bear battle squad but also to the Lucky Wind battle squad led by Luo Jin. After losing Luo Jin, their most powerful member, although they still had Lunuja who could use light flux energy, the achievements of Lucky Wind battle squad fell greatly. Within a few short days, Lucky Wind City's rank fell from 50th position to 80th position very quickly. During these several days, the Heavenly Cloud Fluxer Guild focused its attention on this large-scale sinister attack. They conducted a large-scale inquiry, and after investigating a few shreds of evidence, not only were those powers which had a foot in the assassination business punished severely and hunted down, many cities who had anonymously hired and helped them were also removed from the city ranking tournament, and the resources allocated to them were also stopped. Naturally, the Fluxer Guild wasn't omnipotent, so it was impossible for them to catch everyone behind this despicable attack. For example, the background power behind the attack on Lucky Wind City's Li Yunmu and Luojin still weren't discovered. Hearing this information, Li Yunmu only laughed and forgot. Regarding the darkness in the leadership, Li Yunmu was clearly aware. But his revenge would be obtained with his own hands. The two shadows continued battling against the king's stronghold for 5 continuous days. The ground had turned red because of their killing. Li Yunmu estimated that this king's stronghold would be destroyed in another 2 days. After all, the number of dwarf witches in the king's stronghold were simply too many. Even though he had not let the two shadows stop even once, he had far underestimated the importance of the dwarf witch race's king's stronghold. When young Shadow and Shadow-2 had been going on continuously for 3 days, a bugle horn was sounded from the king's stronghold. As soon as the bugle horn was blown, all the dwarf witch tribes in the hills sent their elite troops over to help. The several large-scale dwarf witch tribes, dozens of medium-scale as well as hundreds of small-scale dwarf witch tribes sent grade 10 or higher level troops to help out the king grade stronghold. But even then, even with the stronghold requesting help, using all means, and having endless deep reserves, it was still unable to stop the two dark figures, who seemed to have turned into death gods, from massacring all life forms in the king's stronghold. This continued until the 5th day. Even with the help of other tribes, the king's stronghold had become completely unable to resist the attacks from the shadows. During these past 5 days, the two shadows continued to hack without resting, killing more than 4,000 dwarf witches and earning a total 30,000 experience and ability points for Li Yunmu. The number of first-layer elite dwarf witches and dwarf magicians killed totaled 167 and the number of second-layer great dwarf wizards killed was 27. By today, Li Yunmu had earned a total of 188 ordinary crystals and 32 black crystals. Apart from this, by using the 30,000 ability points, Li Yunmu had upgraded his Admiralty cover from the 12th layer to the 17th layer. Now, the Admiralty cover could block an astonishing 47% of the total incoming damage. Blocking almost half of the incoming damage was really extremely terrifying. Furthermore, regarding the 100,000 experience points Li Yunmu required to congeal the third shadow, he presently had 1/3 of the amount. Not to mention that with the two shadows using the battle skills tirelessly for the past few days, it had also increased his proficiency points, raising his charged assault and escaping danger skills to the 3rd level. The momentary boost to his movement speed provided by charged assault had increased to 50% and the damage of its main strike also increased to 50%. Escaping danger's movement boost increased to 80%, far higher than charged assault. The upgrade of these two battle skills allowed the shadows to move with even more freedom among the pile of dwarf witches, taking their survivability to the next level. Foundation skills like Violent Blade, Insect Step, Cricket Cut Kick and Leap Strike were also upgraded to the 4th layer, integrating and linking after the shadows accumulated proficiency points for the past 5 days. Li Yunmu's strength rose to the next level and with his own strength rising, the shadow's strength also followed. After battling continuously, on the dawn of the 5th day, the two shadows had finally brought the king's stronghold to the brink of complete extermination. At this moment, this stronghold, which had incredibly deep reserves and resources, was facing imminent destruction. So is it finally going to be destroyed? This night, Li Yunmu didn't dare to sleep. He kept on observing the whole situation like a god, watching the most crucial part of this battle. The mountain ridges of the Lamo River Zone. Ever since it was created, the king's stronghold had never been destroyed, occupying this place for a full 2,300 years. But at this very instant, no one would have expected that this enormous base of human-like monsters would surprisingly be completely destroyed by a single person, without anyone else knowing. Even Li Yunmu himself still felt a hint of incredulity. However, the reality was shocking. Within a span of 10 days, a king's stronghold of dimensional monsters in the 5th dimension was about to disappear from the history. However, the closer it got to this crucial point, the more clearly Li Yunmu felt a sensed danger from the arrow evasion advanced judgment skill, which had reached the 5th layer. A clear omen of an absolutely terrifying calamity descending. How could the king's stronghold, which couldn't be exterminated by all the fluxers of humanity, be so easily destroyed by him alone? Finally, the answer to this puzzle was provided as the last of their reinforcements collapsed. In the depths of the king's stronghold, there was an ancient altar. At this moment, an extremely old dwarf wizard was moving towards it unsteadily. After reaching it, he poured a drop of beast blood which he was carrying into the altar. Next instant, the color of the night sky suddenly changed. An enormous blood cloud gradually condensed over the whole mountain ridges. The blood cloud seemed to have broken the rules of the night and reflected blood-red color over the entire king's stronghold. A heart-palpitating fearful sensation suddenly filled everyone's heart. Come back, a terrifying calamity is about to descend. Even if Li Yunmu was just watching as a spectator, at this moment, he had also forgotten to breathe while staring fixedly at the blood cloud in the sky. The two shadows also seemed to have sensed this sudden transformation as they subconsciously stopped killing the escaped fishes of the king-grade stronghold and raised their heads silently to look at the anomaly in the sky. At the same time, within the heavenly cloud steel castle which had stopped nearby, many veteran seniors had also sensed something. They raised their heads one by one to look at the sky with alarmed expressions. This omen of a terrifying calamity descending is exactly the same as the one I had sensed when I had gone with everyone to destroy the palace of the basilisk. Could it be that the king's stronghold of the dwarf witch tribe? When Tangan raised his head to look at the distant blood cloud in the sky, he was suddenly extremely frightened after thinking of something. Heavens, who had destroyed the king's stronghold of the dwarf witch tribe? Who was it? Within the steel castle, one by one, all the seniors crawled out of their bed with an alarmed expression. Chapter 68, Great Spell of Dimensional Field descends. At this moment, all the fluxers in the steel castle were alarmed and the Fluxer Guild was in chaos. This major event happening at the time when all the rookie fluxers were out gaining experience was simply catastrophic. Quickly, transmit the order to all the battle squads. Tell them to immediately flee from the Lamo River zone, escape as quickly as possible. Immediately form a squad of gold crystal fluxers. Command them to quickly rush to the king's stronghold. They are to find out who it was that had silently destroyed the king's stronghold. Time is of the essence. If they have the opportunity, then they must rush to kill the king-grade dimensional monster. Get all the dimensional space eyes to return back and command them to go towards the mountain ridges. Monitor the surroundings of the sealed zone, quickly. Heavenly Cloud Steel Castle Fluxer Guild's Lord Manager quickly gave a series of orders. Lord Manager, Lucky Wind City's Big Bear Battle Squad just happened to be in the vicinity. Perhaps they have more information, should we try to contact them? A member of the Fluxer Guild suddenly said. Yes, absolutely yes, quickly contact their leader Li Daxiang. Lord, we cannot contact them. However, Dimensional Space I number 109 just sent us a video of them fleeing. But given their distance from the center of the great spell of dimensional field, it will extremely hard for them to flee. At this very moment, the information received by the Fluxer Guild wasn't wrong at all. Currently, all the members of the Big Bear Battle Squad were crazily trying to escape with their life, which also including Li Yunmu. At that time, he had been observing the final battle of Young Shadow and S.H.A.D.O.W when suddenly, the door of his room was kicked open by Ling Shuang, who dragged him out of the room without saying anything. Only when he found out what was going on did he understand what kind of calamity he had caused. At this instant, all 5 members of the Big Bear Battle Squad were fleeing in their Thunder God chariot. Without even collecting the fortress, they were trying to get away from the river basin as quickly as possible. At the same time, all the large and small battle squads of the 136 small towns received the urgent warning from the Fluxer Guild. They should no longer continue with this training nonsense and flee for their life. Those that were in the vicinity of the steel castle rushed back to the castle. Some who were at the edge of the river basin couldn't deal with the powerful dimensional beasts and one by one, they used their fastest speed to rush as far away as possible. Great spell of dimensional field. Li Yunmu and the idiot trio heard this for the first time from Ling Shuang's mouth. Li Yunmu had never expected that him destroying the king-grade stronghold would attract the descent of such a terrifying calamity. According to Ling Shuang, the great spell of dimensional field was unleashed by the master race of a region when that race's main stronghold faces the threat of extermination. Once the great spell descends, the whole area would become unstable. And when the time comes, countless life forms from the real fifth dimension would descend. Before the Dark Ages, the dwelling of humanity was considered to be within the fourth dimension. These genuine life forms of the fifth dimension were precisely the organisms of one higher dimension than humanity. If they descend to the Great Lamo River Zone through the unstable dimensional field, then not to speak of the training fluxers, all the living organisms in this whole region would be violently killed by these higher dimensional beings. That's why it was called the Great Spell of Dimensional Field. Don't tell me that the dimensional beasts and monsters we have killed up till now aren't really from the fifth dimension. Big Xiong, who was fearfully driving the Thunder God War Chariot at its fastest speed, couldn't help but ask with a trace of incredulity on his face. The countless dwarf witches they killed were surprisingly not genuine beings of the fifth dimension? Li Yunmu had also heard of this for the first time. Yes, they are not. Also, it can be said the present fifth dimension where we are at now is actually a space opened by the root dimensional stone. Strictly speaking, it isn't classified as the real fifth dimension, rather, it is only a world between the fourth and fifth dimension. The government had named it the fifth dimension to suppress this information. If this fifth dimension remains stable and the dimensional walls form stable boundaries, then the true beings of the fifth dimension cannot descend. However, some unknown person had now forced the dwarf witch race to unleash the descent of the great spell. Currently, our location has already started to destabilize. Wait a minute. Turn left. The beings of the fifth dimension have already started to appear, quick. It has to be said that this was all thanks to the Thunder God Chariot bought by Big Xiong after paying a great price. Otherwise, without it, these 5 people wouldn't have any hope of surviving this disastrous calamity. At this moment, a bitter smile of helplessness appeared on Li Yunmu's face. Was this really the case? Was he just courting death? Sure enough, as time flowed on, the whole Great Lamo River Zone began to destabilize. The Big Bear battle squad had run far away when they encountered the first true being of the fifth dimension descending. It was only in energy form and hadn't materialized completely. Looking from afar, this life form, which sometimes looked like a huge bird and at other times looked like a great jellyfish with an energy body, suddenly appeared in the unstable sky. It is the Dawn Undying Spirit Mother, quickly avoid it. We cannot allow it to stick to us, otherwise, our vitality will be absorbed by it. Even the energy reserves of the Thunder God War Chariot will be absorbed. Ling Shuang strictly commanded with a tightened face. The Dawn Undying Spirit Mother had clearly discovered the existence of people nearby. It could be seen struggling to get close. If the enormous energy form, which spread over several meters, got close to them, then all of them should forget about escaping with their lives. How formidable is it? We should attack it. Li Yunmu promptly asked. It isn't that strong, roughly equivalent to a silver-grade fluxer in strength. However, we are unable to attack it. Material attacks are ineffective towards it and only energy-type attacks can restrain it. Moreover, if we get stalled by it, then soon, more and more fifth-dimensional beings will appear. Good, its floating speed is slower than our Thunder God War Chariot. We should continue to run, there isn't much time. Compared to the frightened expressions on the faces of Crooked Teeth Jiang and Brother Thin, Li Yunmu was much calmer. As long as the strength of these fifth-dimensional beings didn't transcend the rules of this world which restrict powerful beings from entering, he didn't have to worry that much about it. After being upgraded to 17th layer, Admiralty cover could now block almost half of the incoming damage. With his increased defense and escaping danger skill now upgraded to the 3rd layer, he had confidence in surviving this great spell of dimensional field. Thus, when the Thunder God War Chariot steered clear of the Dawn Undying Spirit Mother's attack, his mind re-entered his consciousness. See. In the sky above the king's stronghold, the blood cloud had started to appear increasingly frightening. Finally, it started to rain down blood. Drop after drop of blood began to rain down on the ground. Instantly, on all the hills in the mountain ridges, one terrifying blood-colored plant after another appeared. These terrifying blood-colored trees received nutrition from the blood rain and immediately transformed into the scariest predators in the world. They spread over the entire mountain ridges, covering young Shadow and H.A.D.O.W. Immediately, the sinister mouths of these countless blood-colored plants launched towards the two shadows. Frightening so this was the case. No wonder the king's stronghold of dwarf witches survived for so many years. It wasn't that the Fluxer Guild couldn't destroy this king's stronghold, but that they didn't have the manpower to completely uproot them. Chapter 69, Defense Upgrades to Next Level. Being the center of the great spell's descent, this king's stronghold was instead the most secure location. The blood rain continued to rain down from the blood cloud, spreading all sorts of blood-colored plants everywhere. Even if more beings of the fifth dimension descended, they could forget about stepping a foot in this location. And at this moment, the two shadows faced an unprecedented attack. From the red mud of the ground, a rattan python one suddenly drilled out and moved with the speed exceeding a thunderbolt. It tangled around the body of the shadows. The rattan python's body immediately gave birth to countless sharp thorns which entered the body of the two shadows. However, it didn't find anything to collect and discovered that these two dark figures don't seem to have any blood. The poison injected by it was also ineffective. The rattan python subconsciously tried to retreat back, but at the next instant, it was welcomed by a war blade and an incisive blade energy, chopping it into two parts. But this only stopped one of the several blood-colored rattan pythons. Immediately, a large number of densely packed rattan pythons drilled out of the ground and wrapped around the bodies of the two shadows like a rice dumpling wrapped in leaves, making them unable to move. Poison inject ineffective, absorbing blood ineffective, binding within the next instant, it also became ineffective. Because the two shadows were unable to move, they blended themselves into the darkness of the night, causing their bodies to transform into nothingness. They easily shredded these tangling rattan pythons. Following which, they immediately unleashed violent blade critical leap strike and started massacring these organisms while standing back to back. With the 12 flux points opened and linked together, each of their strikes was filled with flux power blade energy. This also allowed their battle strength to last longer and multiply without end. Ding! Your young shadow has unleashed the violent blade critical leap strike. The 18 continuous strikes have killed 18 rattan python plants. It then jumped high and broke out of the encirclement and fiercely chopped towards a wizard tree monster. Because these blood-colored monsters were transformed by the Blood Rain Wizard, you have obtained triple the amount of experience and ability points. You have harvested a total 432 experience and ability points. Ding! Within the darkness, the enormous whip wizard tree, which had been brandishing its huge tree whip, ruthlessly struck your shadow, causing it to knock against the wizard tree monster. But because H.A.D.O.W's defense is extremely strong, the whip wizard tree could only deal an extremely small amount of damage to H.A.D.O.W. Ding! A group of sword grass monsters have been enraged and instantly launched countless sharp grass swords towards the young shadow, causing 0 damage to the young shadow. Ding! A group of bush tree monsters has rushed towards the two shadows and started to crazily bite them. But since the defense of the two shadow is extremely high, the biting was ineffective. Ineffective 0 damage low damage. Ineffective 2 domineering. At this very instant, Li Yunmu, whose main body was in the Thunder God chariot rushing away, continued to exclaim again and again. Fortunately, the first dimensional box that dropped contained this godly damage reduction cultivation method, the Admiralty cover. It reduced almost half of the incoming damage, thus greatly reducing the damage of terrifying life-threatening attacks. Now that he had opened all 12 flux points, the flux energy protective cover and battle soldier equipment almost completely nullified the remnant damage. Then when he used the iron body, there was no tree monster in this king-grade stronghold which could harm young Shadow and S.H.A.D.O.W. These tree monsters like the grass sword monster and the rattan python that were nourished by the blood rain provided him with triple the experience and ability points, which allowed Li Yunmu's earnings to swell greatly. The tree monsters had high strength. Almost all of them surpassed grade 10, attaining first layer strength or higher. With triple the amount of experience and ability points, Li Yunmu's earnings instantly shot through the roof. The remaining 5,000 ability points which he had quickly rose to 8,000. Without any hesitation, Li Yunmu immediately upgraded Admiralty cover by 1 layer, from 17th to 18th, hence reducing 48% of the incoming damage. Although the 1% increase seemed extremely little, sometimes, this 1% could make the difference. Unparalleled defense. At this moment, after experiencing this crazy battle, Li Yunmu finally understood what the system meant when it previously mentioned absolute strength, absolute speed, and absolute defense. Among the above mentioned, as long as he accomplishes only one. In other words, if he becomes unparalleled in any one field, then he would have sufficient strength to destroy the tricks, destroy 10,000 formations with one strike, such that even 10,000 skills couldn't break his defense. Although Li Yunmu's defense right now hadn't reached that level, towards the countless wizard tree monsters in the king-grade stronghold, his defense was almost unbreakable. What was called unparalleled? This was called unparalleled. If it had been some other battle squad in his place, then even if they had more people and were more powerful, wouldn't they still be completely useless compared to him? Because without unparalleled defense, how could they stay here? How could they continue to resist the endless waves of the elite dwarf witch monsters? How could they continue to survive in front of the endless attacks of the wizard tree monsters? Right now, the shadows had achieved this. Furthermore, with Li Yunmu obtaining 3,000 ability points and instantly upgrading the Admiralty cover to the 18th layer, the shadows had become even stronger. Unknowingly, while going on a killing spree among the group of wizard transformed tree monsters, they had finally killed their way to the altar at the depths of the king's stronghold. In front of them was an old skinny figure gazing at them from the altar, the 3rd layer great chief wizard of the race, the main boss of the entire dwarf witch race. Only 3rd layer. Li Yunmu mumbled. However, he soon discovered that he had greatly underestimated the being in front of him. How could the chief of such a terrifying and populous race only have 3rd layer strength? The blood cloud in the sky had stopped raining. The bony old figure slowly stood up and silently watched the 2 shadows who had killed countless dwarf witches while reaching here. Suddenly, he lifted up the wizard staff in his hand and mumbled a series of strange incantations. Under Li Yunmu's tight observation, the blood cloud began to compress more and more, before finally transforming into a ball of blood mist which entered the body of the great wizard. Suddenly, the bony old figure started to swell. 1.2 m, 1.5 m, 2 m, 2.7 m, 3 m. The silver crystal presence emitted by its body also began to grow more powerful with the increase in his body. Silver light, golden light, rainbow rays. Directly reaching to the matchlessly dazzling 12-colored rainbow rays. A red-colored thunderbolt roamed around the strong body with 12-colored rainbow rays. Crab. 12-colored rainbow human-type dimensional king. This is the legendary king-class dimensional beast. According to legends, I can seize its dark flux energy after killing this king-class dimensional monster. Li Yunmu was completely shocked and his heart began to jump. Chapter 70, Big Misunderstanding. Great Lamo River Zone. Because of the descent of the Great Spell, an increasingly greater number of 5th-dimensional beings started to appear everywhere. The Fluxers who had come to train in this region began to face their attacks one after another. At this very moment, within the Fluxer Hall in the Steel Castle, the representatives of all the cities were sitting with grim expressions. Facing a calamity like the descent of the Great Spell, they could only stay here without being able to do anything. If fluxers with high cultivations were sent out to perform search and rescue, then instead of helping, this action would only increase the number of injured people. Only a dozen or so cities with sufficient strength and had significant figures outside spared no effort to dispatch their best people to provide support to those significant figures like Xia Hangxiu and Wang Ming, who had prominent background and pinnacle-grade innate talent. Heavenly Earth Courtyard, all contact with Heaven Battle Squad lost. Yellow Mountain Courtyard, of the 13 members of Antiquity Battle Squad, 4 have already died. Phoenix Courtyard, the Great Sun Battle Squad have sent out 4 continuous distress signals, they seem to be in an extremely dangerous situation. Ancient River Courtyard, because all your members were in the vicinity of the castle, they have successfully escaped the Lamo River zone and are safe. Within the Fluxer Hall, information about the battle squads from all the cities was being announced one after other. After hearing it, some became worried while some heaved a sigh of relief. However, at the moment, there was one battle squad which was moving in the exact opposite direction of every other squad that was trying to flee from the Lamo River zone. They were swiftly rushing towards the mountain ridges. This squad was precisely the Golden Cloud defensive squad commissioned by the Fluxer Guild. It had a total of 18 people, with the weakest among them having condensed his silver crystal armor and having golden flux energy. Possessing a cultivation of half-step golden crystal flux disciple, it could also be said that even the weakest person in this squad had strength comparable to the assassin who had attacked Li Yunmu a few days ago. As for the captain of the squad, he had congealed golden crystal armor and had a cultivation of half-step rainbow crystal flux disciple. With their strength, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that this Golden Cloud defense squad represented the strongest battle squad in this world. Also, only these people would dare to accept this secret mission while the great spell descended. All of them were sitting inside an all-terrain type enormous war chariot with an extremely low center of gravity and caterpillar tracks. Throughout the whole journey, it continued to move while crushing everything that was in its way like a huge bulldozer. Many of the descending life forms of the 5th dimension were unable to attack properly before they were firmly crushed to death by this fierce war chariot. Its extremely thick vehicle armor didn't even have any scratches. The Golden Cloud defense squad was rushing quickly towards the mountain ridges. However, while they were trying to move as fast as possible, they finally encountered a problem. Suddenly, somewhere within the dimensional field, a monster radiating a fierce devil presence forcibly came out through the dimensional crack and ruthlessly rammed against this enormous war chariot that weighed more than 100 tons. Immediately, the war chariot was thrown into the sky like a toy and heavily smashed on the ground. The war chariot was completely broken. It is an 8-colored rainbow devil king from the 5th dimension. 4 of you remain behind to help me kill it, while the others continue on the path to the mountain ridges. Go quickly. The extremely formidable Golden Cloud defense squad finally encountered a troublesome situation and split into 2. Another Rainbow Crystal squad member bit his lips. Take care of yourself. All of you follow behind me at your top speed. Losing the war chariot's high speed, protection, and crushing power, the remaining 13 members of the Golden Cloud defense squad stepped on the path of extreme difficulty. Fortunately, they weren't too far from the mountain ridges. However, being the core area of the Great Spell, the number of 5th dimensional beings was even greater in the mountain ridges. Their strength also became increasingly stronger. Thus, this Golden Cloud squad that consisted of 13 people weren't able to rush to their destination in a short amount of time. Suddenly, 12 dazzling rainbow rays rose from the horizon of the king's stronghold. It is the 12-colored Rainbow King. The 12-colored Rainbow King class dimensional monster of dwarf witches is being born. Quickly, move forward. The 13 Golden Cloud defense squad members were becoming more and more anxious with each passing moment. Meanwhile, the Fluxer Guild far away in the Steel Castle similarly investigated the dazzling rainbow formed of 12 colors which flashed on the horizons. Immediately, all the dimensional space eyes in the surroundings were given only one assignment, to rush to the King Grade stronghold and obtain first-hand information about what was going on. However, being the core area of the Great Spell of Dimensional Field, this area was the center of an extremely unstable dimensional field. Regardless of how the dimensional space eyes tried and exhausted every method they had, but when they got close to the core zone, one by one, all of them were affected by the active unstable dimensional energy. Within a short period, all the dimensional space eyes seemed to have lost their sense of direction and scattered around in every direction. Only 2 of these dimensional space eyes coincidentally got knocked in the right direction. Soon, they recorded a video of the events happening at the center of the king's stronghold and transmitted it back to the Fluxer Guild. The video has been transmitted. Finally, it has come. A king-class dimensional monster has really been born into the world, and these 2 mysterious figures should be the ones that silently destroyed the stronghold. A member of the guild quickly rushed in and played the genuine first-hand information scouted by the 2-dimensional space eyes. Within the video, a king-class monster in dazzling rainbow colors could be seen. He was facing towards the sky and howling madly. Below it, not too far away, 2 silhouettes could be seen, one at the left and other at the right. Both were rushing towards it. At this point, the video concluded. As the target of this aerial photography was several miles away and due to the chaos created by the unstable energy at the center of the Great Spell, the projected picture relayed back by the 2-dimensional space eyes wasn't very clear. Everyone could only see 2 mysterious figures wearing war god equipment. Even the specific design of these war god equipment had been concealed. War god equipment? Are they from the War God Temple? They have only 2 of them. Lord Manager creased his brows while the others had sunk into an awfully gloomy silence. Even if they were from the War God Temple, when had the War God Temple of the Central Continent produced such terrifying rookies? It was a known fact that the Fluxer Guild had tried many times but hadn't been able to exterminate the dwarf witch stronghold in the Lamo River zone. So how did the War God Temple rely on just 2 people to make these dwarf witches fall to this extent? Continue with the spying and inform the Golden Cloud Guards that they must rush into the stronghold and try to obtain victory before the people of the War God Temple at all costs. The Lord Manager pondered over it for quite a while before finally giving this command. Lord, the 2-dimensional space eyes which had sent this information have already been damaged beyond repair, and the Golden Castle Guards have encountered an 8-colored rainbow Devil King monster. Presently, they have also entered the danger zone. Pang! Lord Manager smashed his fist heavily on the table in front of him. At this moment, Li Yunmu didn't have the faintest idea that because of all sorts of reasons, the Fluxer Guild had subconsciously determined his 2 shadows as people of the War God Temple. Due to the unclear picture, they had mistakenly believed that the outline of the battle soldier equipment to be that of War God equipment. There was nothing wrong with it. The external silhouette of the battle soldier, battle general, and War God equipment was identical to each other. With the first impression being the strongest, who could have possibly thought that the 2 formidable Fluxers that had brought the entire king's stronghold of dwarf witches to the brink of extermination were unexpected just 2 shadows wearing battle soldier equipment?